Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are diving into the ultimate historical whodunit, the mystery of the fall of the Western Roman Empire. You know, for over a millennium, Rome was literally the undisputed heavyweight champion of the Western world. And then, poof, it just wasn't. The end of classical antiquity and the dawn of the Middle Ages basically hinges on this one massive collapse. But how does a superpower that commanded millions of people and stretched across entire continents just vanish? Let's get into it. For centuries, folks have debated the exact cause of Rome's demise, making it one of history's absolute most fascinating cold cases. Think about it. Was it brutally murdered by outside forces? Did it basically commit suicide through internal rot and terrible economic policies? Or, and hear me out on this one, did it pull off an elaborate faked death, transforming into something else entirely? Our understanding of this event isn't just dusty ancient history, it's actually deeply shaped by our own modern anxieties. Okay, let's take a quick look at the agenda of suspects and theories we're about to investigate in this historical cold case file. We'll start with the initial historical cold case, then look into internal decay and complexity, examine invaders and environmental shocks, break down the catastrophic collapse, and finally end with a massive plot twist: continual transformation. All right, starting off with Section 1, the historical cold case and what we're calling the original police report. Let's map out the scene of the crime right now, just to ground us in the sheer chaos of the era before we try to figure out why it all happened. The late 4th and 5th centuries were basically a master class in how to lose control of your borders. Back in 376, you have this unmanageable influx of Goths that leads straight to war. Flash forward to 410, and Rome is shockingly sacked by the Visigoths. In 455, the Vandals do it again. And finally, we hit the traditional time of death, September 4th, 476, when a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposes the very last Western emperor who is literally just a teenager named Romulus Augustulus. If there's an original police report for the fall of Rome, historian Edward Gibbon wrote it way back in 1776. Gibbon impartially reported that the empire yielded to the pressure of its own immoderate greatness. Basically, it got too big, meaning all that prosperity actually just ripened the principle of decay. He also, famously and somewhat controversially, suggested that the adoption of Christianity replaced martial virtues, preaching patience and pushing people toward monastic life instead of defending the empire. But as modern historians have figured out, this original report was pretty incomplete. History is rarely that simple. Which brings us to Section 2, internal decay and complexity. Was it an inside job? So if internal decay didn't solely kill Rome, what do modern systemic theories say about an inside job? Anthropologist Joseph Tainter argues that the sheer cost of running the empire eventually exceeded the benefits of conquering new land. He calls this the diminishing returns on complexity. You see, Rome solved its early problems by conquering neighbors and just taking their resources. But eventually, maintaining that massive bureaucracy, the sprawling infrastructure, and the giant military needed to defend all those borders, it became a colossal energy drain. At a certain point, investing in social complexity just stops paying off. And to really illustrate just how tricky diagnosing this collapse actually is, historian Alexander Demant went ahead and enumerated 210 different theories for why Rome fell. Yep, 210. We aren't just looking at one or two simple ideas here. Because records from the 4th and 5th centuries are incredibly sparse, historians have a ton of blank spaces to fill in. And let me tell you, those 210 theories range from the totally plausible to the absolutely bizarre. Other prime internal suspects include economic ruin from excessive government intervention and inflation, as theorized by Ludwig von Mises, along with the constant, exhausting grind of civil wars. Economist Bruce Bartlett pointed out that excessive taxation and price controls essentially crippled the market. Meanwhile, military historian Adrian Goldsworthy points out that the real killer wasn't even outside invaders, but the endless civil wars between Roman military factions fighting for the throne. They basically bled themselves dry long before the invaders even knocked on the door. Moving on to Section 3, invaders and environmental shocks, plagues, and yes, poison. Now, what's really interesting here is the introduction of monocausal and catastrophic theories, the bizarre wildcards of our investigation. Geochemist Jerome Noriagu controversially accused a very specific silent killer, lead-poisoned wine. Back in the 1980s, he put forward the idea that the Roman elite essentially poisoned themselves into a state of neurological decline. Now, to be fair, many historians heavily discount this theory today because there just isn't widespread concrete evidence for it. But the mechanics of how the Romans actually consumed this lead, well, it's absolutely fascinating. Let's look at how this builds. Lacking refined sugar, the Romans actually made sweetener by boiling acidic grape juice into a concentrated syrup called sapa. But they boiled this must in lead pots, which leached highly toxic lead acetate right into the syrup, creating an incredibly sweet additive. It creates this highly engaging, if slightly absurd, mini narrative of self-poisoning. Imagine bringing down the greatest empire on earth just because you had a sweet tooth and absolutely terrible cookware. Okay, moving away from lead pots, we arrive at section 4, the catastrophic collapse, or the home invasion. Here we have the catastrophic collapse theories championed by historians like Peter Heather. They argue the empire was actually in pretty decent shape until a highly specific sequence of geopolitical nightmares broke the borders wide open. Heather describes a fatal chain reaction. First, you have the Sassanid Persian Empire rising in the east, which forced Rome to divert massive military resources away from Europe. Then, out of the Eurasian steppe, the Huns arrived. These Huns completely terrified the Germanic tribes, essentially pushing them across the Rhine and Danube rivers right through Rome's front door. And they didn't come as conquerors at first, but as heavily armed refugees. So the absolutely crucial point here, as Brian Ward Perkins notes, is that these invasions triggered a vicious circle that totally destroyed the essential tax base needed for survival. Once these foreign groups established themselves inside the empire's borders, they took over the wealthy agricultural land. No land, that means no taxes. No taxes meant Rome couldn't pay its legions, and without the legions, they couldn't kick the invaders out, which just led to more lost land and even fewer taxes. It was a completely unstoppable downward spiral.
And now for section 5. We've looked at murder and suicide, but it's time for our final massive plot twist, continual transformation, the faked death.
What if the underlying assumption of our entire investigation is completely wrong? Did the Roman Empire actually pull off an elaborate fake death? This brings us to the late antiquity school of thought. This perspective totally challenges the catastrophic narrative. They look at the evidence and go, wait a minute, the people living in Italy in the year 477 probably didn't wake up feeling like their entire civilization had just abruptly ended. Historians like Peter Brown argue that Rome didn't actually collapse abruptly, but simply transformed and rebranded itself into the Middle Ages, heavily emphasizing continuity over catastrophe. Think about it. The barbarians who took over didn't want to destroy Rome. They wanted to be Romans. They kept the Roman laws, they adopted Christianity, they used the exact same Roman administrative systems. The political management at the very top shifted from an emperor to various Germanic kings, sure, but the cultural DNA of the empire survived and evolved.
Henry Perrin supported this idea too, claiming the actual rupture came centuries later when shifting trade routes turned Western Europe into a stagnant backwater. The famous Perrin thesis suggests that as long as the Mediterranean Sea remained a Roman lake, facilitating free trade, the classical world survived just fine. It was only when Islamic expansion in the 7th and 8th centuries cut off those crucial trade routes that Western Europe was forced into becoming an isolated agrarian society. That, Perrin argues, is the true start of the Middle Ages.
To wrap all this up, this table summarizes our primary historians and their leading suspects in the fall, or, transformation of the Western Roman Empire. From Gibbon's moral decay to Heather's barbarian dominoes, Brown's cultural continuity, and Ward Perkins' economic collapse, the truth is likely a remarkably complex cocktail of all of these factors. History is just entirely dependent on the lens through which you view the evidence. So as we study this ancient mirror, the ultimate question really remains. Are we obsessing over Rome's fall simply because we fear our own? Are our modern societies showing these exact same symptoms of collapse? From diminishing returns on social complexity to economic inflation and border crises, it's incredibly easy to project our modern anxieties right onto the past. Understanding how the greatest empire of antiquity unraveled isn't just about ancient trivia, it's a profound lesson in the fragility of complex systems. So what do you think? Did Rome fall, or did it just pull off the greatest transformation in history? Keep exploring, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.